It has become one of the most infamous dates in modern history. The terror attacks on 9/11 took the lives of nearly 3,000 people, and it changed the world. On the morning of September the 11th, 2001, 2 planes flew into the World Trade Center in New York.
We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
Hijacked American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the North and South Towers, killing at least 2,750 people.
It just blew up, a big explosion, people started running, it was just chaos everywhere.
I saw the plane hit the building. I can't say anything.
And people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
That same day, another American Airlines flight crashed into the Pentagon just outside Washington, D.C., killing 187 people. A 4th airliner, United 93, was also hijacked and was believed to be heading for Washington, D.C. too. The target, the Capitol building. But it crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after the passengers and crew tried to regain control. The terror group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, was quickly identified as being responsible for the attacks. In total, nearly 3,000 people died, the worst terror attack on US soil in history. America was consumed by grief, anger, and revenge.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The response by the West, led by America under the presidency of George W. Bush, marked the start of the so-called War on Terror.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
Within just weeks of 9/11, the US bombing of Afghanistan began. Afghanistan was run by the Taliban, who allowed Al-Qaeda to grow and operate within the country. When the Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden, the US, supported by NATO forces, began a war to oust them and take down Al-Qaeda.
They went in with a very narrow tactical objective to root out the terrorist leadership. Then they realized that they couldn't sustain that situation without an investment in nation building. The nation building part of the exercise ultimately was botched.
It would become America's longest war. Tens of thousands of Afghans have been killed, and many thousand American and NATO troops too. In all, the United Nations estimates that nearly 250,000 people have died, most of them civilian. And it all came to an end for America in 2021 when President Joe Biden pulled US troops out of the country. Afghanistan swiftly fell back to the Taliban once again.
Terrorists grow and thrive in security and governance vacuums, so the way that we've left Afghanistan doesn't bode well.
The war in Afghanistan was followed 2 years later by the invasion of Iraq on the elusive hunt for Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. There began another long war for America. No weapons of mass destruction were found. Saddam Hussein was toppled, and sectarian tensions in the country were stoked, all with profound regional implications. In 2020, a study estimated the war on terror has led to hundreds of thousands of deaths and around 38 million war refugees and displaced people. On May the 2nd, 2011, nearly 10 years after 9/11, US Special Forces shot and killed a man in hiding in a house in northwestern Pakistan. A decade after 9/11, they'd got him.
After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
The war on terror was also waged at home with the introduction of the Patriot Act. It allowed the US government to keep tabs on its citizens, tapping phone calls, emails, and more.
There hasn't been a major Islamist attack in the US since 2001, and that's essentially been the US measure of success. But if you look at this from a global perspective, you've seen a massive attacks from Bataclan to Christchurch, all of which in a way link back to this, not to speak of the continuing and rising terrorism across Africa and the Middle East.
As the US war on terror continued, the spotlight shined back on America's own behavior. It emerged that the CIA was secretly taking suspects to countries on so-called rendition flights, where they could torture them. The Guantanamo Bay detention center became a symbol of America's failure to uphold the values it seeks to defend. 20 years after 9/11, 40 prisoners remain at Guantanamo. Most have not been charged, none have yet faced trial. They include the 9/11 mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Of course, 9/11 had other impacts as well. It led to an increase in anti-Muslim sentiment across America and beyond. In 2017, a survey found that half of US Muslims find it more difficult to live in the country since the attacks.
Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry predates the tragic events surrounding 9/11, but there was certainly an exasperation and normalization of that bigotry in the immediate aftermath. I think that when we reflect on the last 2 decades with respect to the American Muslim community, it's important to note that that experience has largely been a mixed bag. On the one hand, we've seen increased integration of Muslim Americans in almost all spheres of law, politics, and society. On a different note, however, we've also seen increased discrimination against Muslim Americans.
One other impact of 9/11 has been air travel. It has been transformed to make us safer, but with huge implications. Before the attacks, security wasn't as intense and check-in queues were nowhere near as long. That has now all changed. There are also changes on the planes themselves, with pilots now locked beyond heavily reinforced cockpit doors. 9/11 has become one of these symbolic moments for America, an inflection point in the country's history. It was and it remains a moment of deep trauma.
The long-lasting effects of 9/11, of the war on terror, I think, are very visible in many ways. Afghanistan, again, of course, we're still facing the consequences of Iraq, which led to ISIS. ISIS is not gone, all of which, also prevented a response to Syria. And the aftermath of Syria, in a way, totally reshaped Europe, reshaped attitudes, emboldened a new far right, deepened polarization around this new global fault line. And in a way, if I were to say, the tragic outcome of 9/11 is that it succeeded in doing what it wanted to, and that is to polarize us in new ways.